Okay, hello, hello. In this episode, we are diving into a more personal experience that hit home and resonated with me so much that I had to share this input with all of you too. And I want my podcast to be a place where you get to experience things alongside me, as well as getting new topics and education along the way. Like I definitely have a lot of topics that I know and I coach people through, but I am also human and walk this crazy life with the same fears as you guys too. And we're just going to go tackle them head on together sometimes around here. So buckle up. This one is straight from my brain having a big aha moment recently. But first off, I need to shout out Kacia Get Merry for the inspiration behind this episode. If you are not listening into her podcast, Empower Her, it is a must. I have been listening for the past year, and she seriously is the best cheerleader you could ever imagine, just sharing the truths of life in real time, which makes it just that much better. And it's been so amazing and powerful to listen into her pep talks twice a week. And I actually took her intro to podcasting course to launch this exciting new podcast of mine. So, one, Kacia, I love you so much. And you are the absolute best to help me understand all the ins and outs of podcasting and how to do the dang thing. And two, loves, if you are not following her on Instagram or listening to her podcast, this is your sign to go do it. She is the absolute hype woman, like with the most energy. It is the best. And I will link her podcast and her Instagram in the show notes. So feel free to go check her out. As I said, it is a must. So, the reason why I am bringing all of this up is because one of her latest episodes that dropped last Monday called Pep Talk, What If It's Not What You Think? I will also put this episode into the show notes for you guys to go listen ASAP because it blew my freaking mind. What she talked about was the fear of failure and fear of success. And sometimes we can get so wrapped up in, failing at something, and we kind of miss the fact that there could actually be a deeper layer here that is actually fear of success that is holding us back. So before I get into what she said, I want to define both fear of failure and fear of success. So fear of failure, also side note, did you know that there's a proper term for it? It is called aticophobia. So basically, this is learning something new. Honestly, just learning something new every day around here. But the definition is that fear of failure may cause you to put off or avoid any activity or scenario that has the potential for an unsuccessful outcome. You may be scared to try new things, take risks, or embrace growth from this quote unquote failure. And the underlying cause is typically shame or embarrassment, right? Like failing can trigger these feelings of feeling worthless and avoiding trying in the first place. And that can sometimes serve as a way to protect yourself from disappointment, regret, and sadness, right? And on the opposite end, fear of success, which also can be called achievemophobia. Is that real? Like, so wild. Anyway, fear of success is anticipating how other people will react to your triumph. So that could be, maybe having more negativity or more people judging, that sort of thing. So here's what I wanted to get into that she said that blew my mind. Fear of failure, that she said, is you avoid trying to figure things out and essentially not bother trying so that there is no opportunity to fail, which just really hit home. And I was like, yeah, I totally get that. But then when she said fear of success, the definition that she got, I was like, ooh, this really resonates with me. And she said that the fear of success is the concern that once we achieve something new, we will be incapable of sustaining it, or that we may suffer in some way because of it. So, to those that may not fear success, they see having more success as having more opportunities. But Keisha thought of it as having more success feels more like obligations. And this hit home for me so much. And that is why I wanted to like bring this conversation to the forefront. Um, so like being afraid of what will happen when you're in the spotlight Like, can I actually maintain it? And sometimes we can look to our past to see if there's evidence, right? Which will be harder since there isn't really any, and that it's so new if we're trying to get to this next level and succeed at something. And I truly believe that I am capable of what I desire. Like, I know it is in me. So like that's what I've experienced. So it's interesting to kind of think of this other way, right? Of like fear of success, like some other elements she mentioned was thinking it'll be more on your plate and more responsibility, and fear of success also being like you worry about that negative backlash and worry that we won't be able to handle all of that, and essentially worrying that it is going to be more complex. And something that she said was, you do not need to worry about future use problems today, which just like really resonated with me. But essentially, I wanted to bring this to the forefront because for most of my life, I feel like I have always been so worried about fear of failure. And I associated that with a lot of judgment and definitely shame and that embarrassment of being like, oh my gosh, like, what if I fail at this and people see me in a negative way, or I get judged for what I'm doing? And I didn't realize that there was more so this element of fear of success. Like, the way that she said it of like being worried about maintaining that level just really stuck out to me. So there's two parts that really stuck out to me. Really, that component of, will I be capable of sustaining this success? And then the other part was worrying about having more responsibilities. So I'll tackle that first one of sustaining it. I never thought about it in this way. Like, it's so interesting because I was always labeling for myself if I avoided something that I knew I was capable at, right? Like, that I feel like is the key distinction, is like I truly believe that I'm capable of whatever I desired, of going for the thing. Like, I have that in me and I feel that at my core, but there's something that I was still resisting. There was something that was still in the way. And I just thought I was avoiding the failure. I thought I was just, not wanting to deal with failing. But there's also like a whole other side of this, like a whole other perspective where it's like, if I believe in myself so much and I know I can do it, I feel like there is this element of like, what if I am successful? Then what does that mean? Who am I as that person? What does, successful Sonia look like? Does that mean that I'm going to have to be doing more, achieving more, and handling a lot of other things on my plate? Like, really thinking about it in this context of like, I truly deep down, I think I was way more fearful of this like weight of what success actually looked like. And I was telling myself that in this time. Whereas, like, I feel like I was labeling all of these fears of around failure. But when I look at my past and I look at all the things that I have done, I have taken the action. I took the leaps, and thinking back to my experiences of like when I did fail at something, I was that person to look at it and navigate it to be like, oh, this is something that I can learn from. And I think that's a big key distinction, which is something that Kacia mentioned in her episode, is that she's not afraid of failure. Like, to her, it is giving her feedback and that she can approach it differently next time. And the feeling of not having clarity is her concern. So to escape this unknown of like lack of clarity, she was like, well, I'm going to go and take the action to find out, to understand like where to go from there. And so she was more afraid of that regret than failure itself. And so I really do resonate with that too. Like, I feel like when I look back at all of my experiences of taking a chance on myself and saying yes and taking that leap, whenever I eventually did it, I wasn't worried about the failure of it. Like I feel like there was always a part of me that was like, I was already telling myself like in those moments of like, I'm going to take this leap and I'm going to prepare for the worst case scenario. And I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that like do the same thing too, where you're like, I'm going to take this leap, but I'm going to prepare myself for like the worst case of whatever's going to happen. So even for an example, like when I was doing my studying for my BCBA exam, I was so terrified of failing. But at the same time, when I think back to that scenario, I had already prepared myself of like, it's okay if I fail the first time. I know I can take it a second time. And, worst case in that, like I knew I could take it a third time. And when I was thinking about that exam, I had kind of prepared myself for that. And I mean, there's always an element of preparing yourselves for worst case scenario. Like if we're constantly always doing that, we're not allowing ourselves to really like fully step into what we can do in those moments. And so sometimes it can fuel us opposite end, right? Is like, oh, well, I don't want to fail, so I'm going to work harder. And so in those moments, I acknowledge that like, even if I were to fail this exam, it's okay. And I can continue to study, focus on the areas that I didn't feel like I had studied enough, and really just tackle it head on in that way. So sometimes we create a worst case scenario plan, which really is a great strategy for when we're supporting ourselves through a big leap decision. Um, but I say it could be at our detriment if we don't do our best and tell ourselves that we are going to fail and allow ourselves to fall into that trap of like, I'm already living the worst case scenario, so why bother? That's sometimes where I feel like we can get really caught up in that aspect. So it really depends on the motive behind creating a worst case scenario plan. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But when I look back at that, it's like I ended up passing the exam on the first time, and it was such a wild thing to kind of think about. Is like I allowed myself to work and study and do that exam to the best of my ability and create a plan for myself, and that was supportive. And that wasn't me fearing failure. That was me assessing the situation and being like, yes, I might fail, but here's what I can do. Like I was already in the optimistic space of like, here is what I can do. And so I think there's also a big element of that of like, once I got my BCBA, like if there's any other people in the field of APA listening to this, and you know those four letters BCBA is sometimes a huge weight on your shoulders. And so I think there was a subconscious layer that I didn't realize at the time of like what it meant to be a BCBA after I passed that exam. And it just makes me realize like I think that there was a fear underlining this of like, okay, what does that success look like now? I have those four letters. And it's like now I have to uphold it. Now there's a lot more for me to manage and process. And I think I made that more a part of my story of like, what does it mean now that I am a BCBA? What does it mean now that I have this credential? Do I have to be a different person? Do I have to act a certain way? It just was one of those things where after I got it, I had this like, I remember this like visceral feeling of like, yeah, I had a lot of joy that I passed, but then I was like, what does that mean? Now I feel like there's so many things I have to maintain, and can I maintain it? And I did have those thoughts at the time, but I didn't have the language in me to know that that technically was fear of success. And so I really just wanted to bring this to the forefront because a lot of us can wrap our heads around, I don't want to fail. And that's totally valid. And I think a lot of the time we do get wrapped up in that. But there is this other layer of like, can I sustain when I achieve that thing? And I think as I've gone on my own like personal healing journey, I think that has been my biggest fear is like when it comes to journaling and meditating and working out and working on myself, not that it's necessarily a fear of success. Like there is a specific box I can check when it comes to my own personal development, because that is a lifelong journey. But I think it's always been like, can I sustain this new life that I want to create for myself? Like, am I, and I feel like there is a lot of times where I avoid doing my journaling or meditating sometimes, right? Like, there's definitely those moments or, seasons of life I don't do it as often. And then it makes me think, like, am I really stepping into and being able to maintain that version of myself? And I feel like now I feel like this is more towards everybody that's listening in the sense of what does it mean to really have this, we're going on our personal journeys, we're making changes in our life for the better to support ourselves. And I think we all have an element of fear around being able to sustain it. And because it is, like we're all going on that journey of figuring things out and making changes and shifting our perspectives and shifting our habits so that we can fulfill this like 2.0 version of ourselves and reflect and notice where do we want to be moving forward in our life. And a lot of the time we really get wrapped up in, oh, well, like if I fail at it, then I'm not good at it and I'm not worthy. And yes, we can fall into that trap. But I think there is a deeper layer underneath that where it's like, if I do these things for myself, that means I have to maintain it in a certain way. And I think there's a fear there because it's like, if I don't maintain it, then what? Then who am I? Then what does that mean about myself? And I think there's so much to say there. And so this is really just an episode of me just sharing what kind of aha experience I had, because this is something I'm navigating in this moment, right? Is like when it comes to sharing content on Instagram, like if I am consistent with it, if I speak up, if I share more vulnerably, if I am, if I share an unpopular opinion, like I think deep down, the thing that makes me avoid those things is because I'm worried about more success with it. I'm worried about what that level of success looks like and maintaining that. And I think one of the best things that Kacia said in that episode too is that we have our current day mindset of how we are currently navigating things, and it feels scary to think about, what does that level of success look like? We don't know that answer. And I think that does scare us. And so she was saying, once you do reach that level, you do have the ability to gain the resources to support you through that up level essentially. And we don't know that now because we're not there now. So this is really just me sharing a very like personal example on my end. And my takeaway here for you is really just taking notice of the version of fear of failure. And if it's really about failing and thinking about, um, you might have this fear. And like, I do think there is an element that I fear failing. But when I think about the fact of like, when I fail, how do I react to that? And when I think about that, I think if I were to fail, I know I'd figure it out. So now that I think of it in that way, I'm like, oh, I don't actually think it is fear of failing if that's how I envision it. So, my takeaway here for you is when you think of failing, do you have this moment where you're like, oh, I know I can figure it out even if I fail? And if that's the case, if that's kind of where you're at, where you're like, I don't think it's really going to affect me if I do fail, then I would challenge you to think more on maybe it's fear of success of like, okay, what if I succeed at this job, in this career, in my personal journey, doing all these different things in your life? Does that give you like, does your heart kind of get to a point where you're like, oh my gosh, like that's a lot? And like, I don't know how I would manage that. Like that's how I feel when I think of success. So that's my takeaway here. If you think about those, what resonates with you, what's coming up for you, and I would love it for you to pop it in the DMs with me, come chat on Instagram. I would absolutely love to start a conversation about this with you. So if you want to share and give your insight, I would love to hear what really resonated with you from this episode. If it is more fear of failure, or if you have other insight, maybe I can have a part two of this conversation. But I really just wanted to bring this out because it really hit home for me in such a different way. So if this resonated with you, come chat with me, say hello. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. And you will notice throughout the journey of this podcast, I will have different kind of story time episodes, a bit more other episodes on education or certain topics and more takeaways and action steps. And so I just wanted to share this tidbit for you today. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of the week.